In the spring of 1968, Saigon was a city caught between two worlds. Lieutenant James Mitchell had been stationed there for 8 months, serving as a logistics officer at the Military Assistance Command headquarters. He was 26 years old, tall and lean, with the kind of quiet demeanor that made people trust him instantly. Back home in Ohio, his family ran a small hardware store, and James had grown up learning that when someone needed help, you didn't ask questions, you just helped. That value would soon put his entire military career on the line. James had a routine in Saigon. Every morning he would review supply requests and coordinate shipments. But there was something else James did that wasn't part of his official duties. On his days off, he would volunteer at a small orphanage on the outskirts of the city, a crumbling building run by a Vietnamese nun named Sister Lan. The orphanage housed about 40 children, most of them victims of the war. James would bring them candy, play soccer with them in the dusty courtyard, and help Sister Lan repair broken windows. The children called him Mr. Jimmy, and their laughter was the only thing that made the war feel distant. One afternoon in late April, Sister Lan pulled him aside. Her face was pale and her hands were trembling. She told him that the orphanage was in serious trouble. The building had been condemned by local authorities, and they had 2 weeks to evacuate. The problem was, there was nowhere for the children to go. She needed transportation to move the children to a safer location in the countryside, about 60 miles north, where a church had agreed to take them in. But she had no vehicles, no money for fuel, and no official authorization. James knew this was going to be complicated, but as he looked at the children playing in the courtyard, he made a decision that would change everything. James spent the next 3 days planning in secret. He found 2 allies, Sergeant Dave Thompson, a mechanic from Texas, and Corporal Maria Santos, a supply clerk from California, who had also volunteered at the orphanage. Both agreed to help without hesitation. The plan was simple but risky. They would use a supply convoy scheduled to head north on May 2nd. James would forge the paperwork to include a detour. The children would be hidden under tarps in the back of one of the trucks. It was deception, it was against regulations, and it could land all 3 of them in military prison. The night before the operation, James barely slept. When dawn broke on May 2nd, they loaded the children into the truck before sunrise. Sister Lan blessed each child and thanked James with tears streaming down her face. The convoy rolled out of Saigon, 3 trucks heading north. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. But then, about 40 miles out, they hit a military roadblock. A young lieutenant stepped out and signaled for the convoy to stop. James felt his heart hammering as the officer walked down the line, getting closer to the truck carrying the children. James made a split-second decision. He walked up to the lieutenant and struck up a conversation, distracting him. Dave and Maria joined in, creating a wall of chatter. It worked. The lieutenant waved them through without inspecting the trucks. They finally reached the church compound, and the children tumbled out safely. Sister Lan hugged James tightly and told him he had saved 40 lives that day. But James knew the real test was still ahead. For a week, it seemed like they had gotten away with it. But then on May 9th, James was called into the office of Colonel Richard Brennan, the commanding officer. Brennan told James that an audit had uncovered discrepancies in the supply logs. He asked James directly if he had used military resources for non-military purposes. James could have lied, but he wasn't about to start now. He looked Brennan in the eye and told him the truth. He explained about the orphanage, the condemned building, the children who had nowhere to go. He took full responsibility and said that Dave and Maria were just following his orders. Brennan listened in silence. When James finished, the colonel leaned back and let out a long sigh. He told James that what he had done was a clear violation of military regulations, but then Brennan asked James why he did it, genuinely curious. James explained that he had been raised to believe that doing the right thing mattered more than following the rules when lives were at stake. Brennan was quiet for a long moment, then told James he understood, but he had no choice but to report the incident up the chain of command. If you've been enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button. It helps us bring you more incredible untold stories. All right, back to James. The investigation took 3 weeks. During that time, James was placed on limited duty. The story spread around the base and reactions were mixed. Some soldiers thought James was a hero. Others believed he had betrayed his oath. Then, in early June, the decision came down. James would not face a court-martial. However, he was being officially reprimanded, and he was being reassigned immediately to a supply depot in the Central Highlands, far from Saigon. It was a punishment disguised as a lateral move. James accepted the decision without protest. On his last day in Saigon, Sister Lan came to see him. She brought a letter signed by all 40 children, each one drawing a picture or writing their name. She told James that because of him, those children now had a future. As James held that letter, he realized that no matter what happened to his career, he had made the right choice. The Central Highlands were a different world. James spent his days managing inventory and coordinating helicopter resupply missions. It was important work, but it felt distant. He missed the orphanage and the children. In September, General Paul Hendricks arrived for an inspection and asked to meet with James privately. Hendricks told James that he had read the full report and that the army needed more soldiers who understood the difference between what was technically wrong and morally right. He offered James a new assignment, working with a civil affairs unit focused on humanitarian projects. James didn't hesitate. Within 2 weeks, he was building schools and providing medical assistance to Vietnamese communities. When he finally returned home to Ohio in early 1970, he carried the memory of 40 children who were alive because he had chosen to act. Back in the United States, James struggled to readjust. He took a job at his family's hardware store, but felt restless. One day he received a package from Maria Santos. Inside was a newspaper article about the orphanage, describing how the children were thriving. Maria wrote that what they had done mattered, that those kids were living proof that individual acts of courage could change lives. James realized he had been carrying guilt about whether he had made the right choice, but seeing the evidence gave him peace. Over the years, James built a new life. He ran the hardware store, volunteered with veterans organizations, and mentored teenagers. In 1985, a documentary filmmaker named Rebecca Hartman tracked him down and asked to interview him about the orphanage evacuation. She helped him reconnect with some of the children who were now adults. One of them, a doctor named Min, told James that he had gone into medicine because he wanted to help people the way James had helped him. When the documentary premiered in 1986, it received widespread attention. James received letters from people all over the country, thanking him for reminding them that even in the darkest times, people could choose kindness. In 1987, the army formally removed the reprimand from his file and acknowledged that his actions had exemplified the highest ideals of military service. James continued to live a quiet, purposeful life. He became a speaker at veterans events, telling audiences that courage wasn't about being fearless, it was about acting despite the fear. He believed that if more people chose to act with compassion and integrity, the world would be a better place. James passed away in 2003 at the age of 71. His funeral was attended by hundreds, including several of the children from Saigon who had traveled from around the world. Min gave a eulogy describing James as the man who had taught him that heroism was about seeing someone in need and refusing to look away. The story of James Mitchell reminds us that heroism can be quiet and deliberate. It can be the choice to risk your career to save children, the willingness to face consequences for doing what you believe is right. The children James saved went on to become doctors, teachers, and parents, proving that the impact of a single act of kindness can echo across generations. James never considered himself a hero. He would tell you he was just a guy from Ohio who tried to do the right thing. But that humility is perhaps the most heroic thing about him, because it means that any of us can be heroes too.